So,
well, that is a beautiful question.
Natalie, I understand that a great deal of your work is involved with borders. I can understand that preoccupation, and certainly it's a worthy one. I'm wondering if you find ways to indicate internal borders, the psychological borders within us, the emotional borders, are the things that both protect and constrain us.
for me, for a lot of my work, what I'm interested in is confusing and questioning and using the physical space of the border and of border crossing as a metaphorical landscape for speakers who are constantly being placed in situations, emotional situations, psychological situations that are similar to the physical border space that they live in, right? So for me, when I think about the speakers of my poems, the border and its dangers and its violence are absolutely real, but those dangers and that violence also takes a huge toll on the psyche of those speakers. And they are constantly trying to cross those borders, both the physical ones and the ones that manifest themselves within.
Natalie, what frightens you more than anything?
I think losing stability frightens me a lot. As an artist, as a person who I was, terrified for a very, very long time of things possibly kind of going under and being shifted under my feet due to immigration for a very long time, both because of my mother and because of my husband. I'm always worried about that. That's what frightens me.
What other art form do you wish that you could master?
I wish I were a painter. I'm terrible at it, but I wish I were a painter. I really do. And I think that there's so much to learn from painting, even in the way that we think about the image, right, and how we see it. So, yeah.
Natalie, can you talk about a time in your writing life when a crisis turned into a victory?
Oh, yeah. I think the crisis of feeling absolutely, suffocated and overwhelmed by my day-to-day while I was working on Lima Limon, I was able to harness that into a book that was really angry and very loud. So I think that I am proud of on a personal level of the way that I didn't sort of cower from that anger that I had at that time in my life. Dion, the critic and the artist often put at odds are two sides of the same coin. Can you talk about the relationship that theory has in your art and art has in your theory? How do you conceive of the two working together in your art?
That is a beautiful question, because it is theory and art that I'm trying to put together in every work, in some ways, right? I am not the innocent artist, who comes at ideas in the work, whether it's poetry or prose or essay, feigning that I know nothing. Right? I know something, and I have an opinion about something, and I have a critique about something, right? How do I shape that into art? I think that I am trying to analyze the world as an act of being in the world. And so that requires a collection of knowledges, collections of analytics, collections of ways of being in the world. And I'm trying to put all of that together. So I think art and theory are not different. I think maybe they're the same thing.
Michael, your work is deeply interested in the role pop culture plays on the American imaginary. How can American pop culture, which is often broadcast all over the world, be a source of trauma for your characters who are often othered by its narratives? How does your work imagine a new way of consuming American pop culture?
I don't actually think necessarily of my characters as being traumatized by pop culture. I think that my characters, like any of us in culture, is always absorbing pop culture and deciding what we think about it. And so my sort of approach to pop culture's impact on my characters is that they sort of take the power of it into themselves. They transmogrify it into something that they need in order to use for their own survival, which is certainly something that I did in A Strange Loop with the character of Usher, who hates gospel plays, and yet he was able to take the sort of power of the gospel play, transmogrify it into something that he needed in order to communicate with his mother. And so I feel like I do that all the time with, forms of pop culture that I don't like, is that I figure out what I don't like about them, and then I satirize them or skewer them, mercilessly. But I have to understand the form of it in order to be able to do that. And once I do that, I can sort of find a new power from the skewering.
Kinesia. Heavy enjambment in a poem can often serve as an aporia, a little death, a coma, a moment for the enthymeme of a poem to come to the surface for the reader. Can you discuss the use of heavy enjambment in the Disographist to create new meanings within the text of the poem?
The first thing is to allow rhythm to have a commensurate measure with meaning. And what that means for me is part of what I was trying to do with the Disographist is to create a kind of breakage in the language that will allow some kind of newness to surface. And so it's always interesting to me to have that sense of starting and stopping and restarting, even if it's just an illusory kind of thing. And to create that sense of breakage that I wanted in the Disographist, because what I'm doing is I'm using Creole syntax to interrupt the meaning, the kind of smooth meaning that we tend to get in the syntax of English. And what that does for me ultimately is that it allows for a different appreciation of a gesture, of starting something and not rounding it up in any neat way to tell the reader what to think. What it is are a series, it's a series of impressions that amount to something. And I want the reader to decide what that something is, And so that sense of enjambment, the heavy enjambment, allows for polysemy, for meaning to pile up, for meaning to create multiple resonances. Natalie, can you tell us how borders can help us think differently about mastery and control in language today?
One of the things that I'm always really interested in are formal constraints within a poem. So whenever I am drafting a poem, I am always sort of tinkering with language but not just tinkering with language as in this is what I want to say or the narrative that perhaps I want to explore, but also thinking about the formal look of the poem, the way that the words sound and bounce off of each other, and fitting those things within the confines of the page or the form that I've selected for that piece. And I think a lot of my fascination with forms inevitably comes from growing up in this border space where I was always asked to be in kind of confined situations and find ways to express personhood and selfhood when you're always being asked to become a number, right? Or to become that biometric scan and lose personhood. And so I think that border spaces concretely provide a really interesting way to express personhood and selfhood and experience, just metaphorically speaking. You can learn forms of existence that otherwise I think you might not force yourself to confront if it weren't for that, right? If it weren't for that situation.